Here we come. Here we come with another class of politics and power. Welcome, and thank you for joining the broadcast. Though I promised I was coming on at 2, but here we are. It is 2:15 West African time. Sorry for coming behind schedule. So I'm here. Let's do it together. You've seen the topic, Aburi Accord, before the guns began to boom. What does that mean? In this class, we are going to have a candid talk. It's a continuation of the videos I have been posting, especially on X and TikTok. At the moment, it is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Emmanuel Ajayi, retired. He's giving us first-hand account of the Civil War. Before Ajayi, there was Dr. Yemi Farumbi, who talked about Awolowo's role before the Civil War. If you scroll down my social media pages, you will find Femi Kende, the author of the book Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History, telling the story of the First Republic. So I'm here to enhance the story I have been telling. It is about history. It is about politics. It is about power. We will look at the Aburi Accord on this edition of the program. But before the guns began to boom, what happened? What were the issues and the events before the guns began to boom? The guns boomed during the first coup, that is the January 1966 coup. The guns boomed during the counter coup of July 1966. The guns went angry, and the civil war ensued. So we will walk down the history lane, understanding where we are coming from. And as we walk down, we'll be consulting political books to broaden the discourse. I hope you're ready for me. I am ready. I'm already with a book here called On a Darkling Plain, a book written by Ken Saro-Wiwa. I'll come to this book. In my promo of this broadcast, I talked about Max Siollun. He's the author of the book Oil Politics and Violence. In the book, he said that the Aburi meeting of January 1967 evolved into perhaps the best documented constitutional debate of all time. That is profound. He makes the point that that accord discussed fundamental concepts regarding the balance of power between the central and regional governments in a federation. You know, that debate is still on. When we say restructuring, we are saying redefine the balance of power between the federal government and the states. And that was the same meeting that was called in Aburi in 1967. Many years after, the discussion is still on the table. As we struggle to contain herdsmen and Boko Haram acts of terrorism, as we fight to arrest the scourge of banditry and insurgency in the southeast, it is important I state at this point that social conflict is inevitable in a society. But social conflict is critical to national development, and it originates from human interaction. As far and as long as members of the society continue to interact, there will be conflict. So conflict is part of human society. Be it a poor or rich country, there is the presence of conflict. What stands progressive countries in good stead is their abilities to transform conflict into new opportunities with less use of violence. That was why on Saturday I was not comfortable with the use of violence to deal with communities like Okwama in Delta State. A well-managed conflict is a source of strength to the political process. Aburi Accord was an opportunity to manage the Nigerian conflict. The bane of the Nigerian state is the mismanagement of conflict, thus plunging the country into the valley of despair. It is the failure of leadership. We mismanage conflict. And because of the mismanagement of conflict, our conflicts snowball into insurgencies. You see what is going on in the southeast? It has become an insurgency. A quiet insurgency is already going on in the Niger Delta. Boko Haram terrorism is insurgency. Banditry is also terrorism. It's insurgency. In the plateau, the victims will want to fight back. It becomes another level of insurgency. Having said that, it is important we reflect on the crisis of early post-independence Nigeria, and we look at how Nigeria handled the conflict that plunged it into a devastating civil war. In this case, Aburi Accord easily comes to mind. I have talked about Max Siollun in the book Oil, Politics and Violence, where he said that the Aburi meeting of January 1967 evolved into perhaps the best documented constitutional debate of all time, because it discussed fundamental concepts regarding the balance of power between the central and regional government in a federation. So if that accord was so fundamental to the peace of the state, why was the accord not implemented? And Ojukwu went to town to say, on Aburi we stand, on Aburi we stand. And Gowon says, no, what was signed in Aburi was misinterpreted. And the argument continued, and the war began. The guns began to boom. Ken Saro-Wiwa, Ken was a good author. He was killed by Sani Abacha. Remember Oguni 9. Ken Saro-Wiwa in the book On a Darkling Plain. If you have the book, you can turn to page 61 to 62. The book is a classic. Page 61 to 62. Yes, I'm trying to get to my own page, where he talked about Aburi Accord. So when news came that general agreement has been reached at the cordial meeting in Aburi, there was general elation. Ojukwu returned and spoke in glowing terms of Aburi. I'm reading from Saro-Wiwa's book. Ojukwu had virtually achieved his confederal aims if the decisions of Aburi were implemented. There was little doubt that peace would return to Nigeria. So Saro-Wiwa agrees that if Aburi Accord were implemented, peace would have returned. He says the generality of Igbos were cock a hoop about Aburi. It was inconceivable that an Igbo man would go to bargain with Hausas and fail to win. Why did he make that statement in this book? Look at it. He says, it was inconceivable that an Igbo man would go to bargain with Hausas and fail to win. The non-Igbos, on the other hand, were dismayed. It looked as though the nation had sold them to the Igbos. In Rivers circles in particular, there was great agitation. Some showed their dismay openly. I had a rather hot argument with an Igbo pharmacist on the issue. He made it quite clear to me that the Igbos were in no mood to brook argument on what was fast becoming a life and death issue to them. At the University of Nigeria, Aburi was accepted because Ojukwu had said it was acceptable. Interesting. I just read from On a Darkling Plain, an account of the Nigerian Civil War, a book written by Ken Saro-Wiwa. The book is out of print now. So if you have a copy, you are among the lucky ones. Udara Books has been trying to find copies, but we can't. This is my personal copy, and I just read from it. If you continued reading the book, Saro-Wiwa said Ojukwu charged that Gowon had had a rethink on the matter and that he had gone back on his words. When they came back from Aburi, Ojukwu was very brilliant in Aburi. So he took the Nigerian side to the cleaners. So they accepted all his argument. He was bright. He spoke impeccable English. He went to Oxford University. So Saro-Wiwa said, Ojukwu charged that Gowon had had a rethink on the matter and that he had gone back on his words when they returned to Nigeria. Because of that, Ojukwu went on to publish the proceedings at Aburi. He even played back a recording made of the proceedings of the meeting. I'm trying to get that audio. I used to have it, but I checked my hard drive. It's corrupt. I will get it, the meeting of Aburi, so that you would listen to it. What happened in 1967? Sarawiwa in his book said Eastern Nigeria was in ecstasies when Ojukwu returned from Aburi, and Ojukwu's reputation soared. They played back the recordings. I want to see the picture of Ken Sarawiwa because I'm talking about him now. I want to see Ken. I hope you can see the picture of Ken Sarawiwa. I'm talking about his book, On a Darkling Plain. His account of what Aburi was. Eastern Nigeria was in ecstasies, and Ojukwu's reputation soared. The playback of the recording showed him as confident, well-spoken, and witty. Ojukwu had obviously done his homework, Sarawiwa said. Ojukwu had won in that debate, he continues. According to Ken Sarawiwa, Aburi became a cash word in homes, motor parks, markets, and offices. The Aburi recordings were waxed on gramophone records and sold at a high price. They were played and replayed in open places, and soon Aburi's singlet appeared on the street. On Aburi we stand. Aburi is our father. On Aburi we sleep. Aburi or nothing, they sloganized. That is Ken Sarawiwa there. The eastern region, governed by Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, believed it was Aburi or nothing. I want us to listen to Ojukwu. Ojukwu here talks about Aburi, and in this talk, pick his words and give meanings to the tone.
The tapes are available. The records are there. In fact, only about 2 weeks ago, I saw a set of the records again. The transcripts are available. But we talked about the Nigerian situation. And certainly, at the end, everybody says, oh, you told them this, you did that. The fact was that our case was so clear. At Aburi, yes, we agreed on area commands for the armed forces. At Aburi, we agreed that the police force would be decentralized. We agreed on those. Yes. We agreed on certain revenue. Aburi again, because I always end up, it sounds odd today, but I always end up by saying I must have been naive. Because I'll confess to you, when I got back to Enugu, oh yes, I had a party, believing that probably the danger was over. That's what we thought. Until they then began to deny everything. It was the denial of Nigeria that made me publish. Everybody talks about confederation. Go and look at the transcript. There is no time that the word confederation came from my lips.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Yes. You know, the power of history. History is alluring. You heard Ojukwu there. There was no time he talked about confederation. He made the point there that he agreed that each region should have its own police. So you can understand why Max Siollun defined Aburi Accord as a fundamental opportunity for peace. That's Ojukwu giving his own side of the story. Yakubu Gowon was the leader of Nigeria. So the negotiation was between Ojukwu and Gowon in Aburi. So let's hear from Yakubu Gowon.
Statement he made first, virtually giving the impression that we've agreed for a confederation to move apart, etc., which was really not in exactly that. If I had had the opportunity to make my broadcast in the first, because that was the agreement, not for him to make the broadcast first, then if I had committed myself to what he said, then there wouldn't have been any problem. But he went and said certain things that certainly looked wrong, and therefore we saw in practically everything he did, I think it was for to play up to the gallery, not being sincere.
The purpose of this press conference is to enlighten the public on the last Accra meeting of military leaders and to tell the nation where we go and restore normal conditions. We reviewed the situation in the Nigerian army, and we all, in the context of the events of 1966, the Constitution of Nigeria will be written in Nigeria by Nigerians on the authority of the people of Nigeria. We, however, agreed to return to the status quo until January 17, 1966. Over-centralization should government until a new constitution is drawn up. In Aburi, we made an excellent start in the bid for permanent peace, but let us not deceive ourselves, minds of Nigeria's military leaders. I did say immediately after that conference that Nigeria will definitely be an indivisible country by the will of the people of this country.
Yes, Yakubu Gowon in a news press conference. In a press conference. That was Yakubu Gowon. I'll be happy to read your comments on the subject. So join the discourse. It's a class for all. There is something to learn from you. So leave your comments as you listen. It is a class of history, politics, and power. And I hope you are enjoying yourself. Let me take some messages here. Ohaji Tiger, thank you. Thank you for the greetings. Akunye Umoba, thank you for calling on the viewers to share. Okoro Donchuk Zizundu. Okay, it says from Gowon's voice you can see lies, double standards. Adeboye Abiodun says, good afternoon, Radio Man. Good afternoon to you. I'm happy that you joined the broadcast. And Azodochi Joke, thank you. He's watching from Moscow. Hi, it's Moscow, Chijoke. Hi, it's Vladimir Putin. Yes, thank you for contributing. Ohaji Tiger disagrees with the role that was played by Ken Saro-Wiwa. And he said he paid for it during Abacha's time. You know, those in Ken Saro-Wiwa's area did not support the Igbos because they were scared of dominance. You know, so those axes fought against Igbos. So that's the point here. Olamide Nyola, thank you for joining the broadcast. The question is, how did we get, you will get the detail. coming from. That is why I will encourage you to watch the videos we have been posting. More videos are coming. And I have seen some comments. Edmond, why is it that it's only Yoruba scholars, veterans that you are interviewing? I understand that question. But the point is that this studio is located in Ibadan. So it's located in the southwest. So I'm surrounded by southwest scholars. Most of the Igbo veterans don't live around here. They are in the southeast. They are growing old, so they are home. And many Igbo scholars are in Lagos. Yes, there are some of them here. But remember, I am attaching the interviews to books, those who have written books. Yes, I've spoken to Igbo scholars. I've spoken to Ojukwu Legbunam. Ojukwu Legbunam lives somewhere in Oka. He's the author of the book, Ironsi. And we are planning to meet soon. It simply means I will have to move the studio to where they are. And that is expensive. I will have to move my crew. We'll get to that point. Yes, because I want to speak with everybody. You know, it's easier for me to be in the studio. My crew, we're here. But by the time we need to begin to move, begin to fly, the cost of production becomes expensive. We are working around it. And one way to support this program, it is also to buy the books we'll bring to you. There are books is tied to state affairs. I want to go to different places to see on my environment, those around me. It's easier to get the Yoruba scholars, but soon you begin to see Igbo scholars joining the debate, right? So how did we get to Aburi? What happened? What took us to Aburi? I want us to look at Nigeria's federalism. But before we look at Nigeria's federalism, I want us to listen to Ojukwu again. Let's listen to Ojukwu again. He raised some fundamental points about Aburi. We played it just now, so we are going to play it again. We're playing it again, and you make your interpretations.
At Aburi, yes, we agreed on area commands for the armed forces. At Aburi, we agreed that the police force would be decentralized. We agreed on those. Yes. We agreed even to show that we didn't separate. At Aburi, we also agreed on certain revenue formula. That's what happened at Aburi. Aburi again, because I always end up, it sounds odd today, but I always end up by saying I must have been naive, because I believed actually that would be the end. I'll confess to you, when I got back to Enugu, oh yes, I had a party, believing that probably the danger was over. That's what we thought. Until they then began to deny everything. It was the denial of Nigeria that made me publish the tapes of Aburi, because we had insisted that each one should have a set of tapes. Everybody talks about confederation. Go and look at the transcript. There is no time that the word confederation came from my lips.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Okay. Let's begin to trace the problems that led to the conflicts, the repeated conflict that eventually dragged the conflicting parties to Aburi in Ghana in 1967. That means I want to go back to pre-independent Nigeria. So let's go. The first point I want to make here is that Nigeria's federalism was consolidated in the Littleton Constitution of 1954. The Constitution recognized Western, Northern, and Eastern regions as the federating units. The powers of the central and regional government were defined in the exclusive, concurrent, and residual list. Following the Lancaster House London Constitutional Conference of 1957 and 1958 and the Wilkes Commission of Inquiry, the Littleton Constitution was amended to become the Independence Constitution of 1960. After the 1957 conference, the Western and Eastern regions attained self-government on the 8th of August 1957. And when I say self-government, the British decided to experiment with Obafemi Awolowo and Azikiwe. They were the leaders of their region, so they attained self-government before Nigeria. So it's like the Western region gained a sort of independence under Awolowo, and the Eastern region under Nnamdi Azikiwe, but not the North. The North wasn't ready. In the 1958 conference, it was agreed that Nigeria become an independent state on the 1st of October 1960, and that plebiscite hold at the behest of the United Nations in northern and southern Cameroons. You know, at some point, Bola Tinubu threw a jibe to the PDP candidate. Even somebody that they said came from Cameroon, we've not raised that issue. He was talking about Atiku Abubakar. You know, part of Adamawa was northern Cameroon at that time. You know, after Germany lost the Second World War, Cameroon was Germany's colony. So when Germany lost the war, the United Nations took over Germany's colonies and handed some of them to Britain and France. So a part of Cameroon was handed to France, and another part was handed to Britain. That is why if you go to Cameroon today, you have a part speaking French, another part speaking English. The part speaking English wants their own country. So at the moment, they are fighting for independence. That's Ambazonia. And they were called mandate territories at that time because Britain and France had the mandate of the United Nations to govern Cameroon. So when Nigeria got her independence, they wanted to know that those parts of Cameroon that were governed by Britain, they wanted to know if they would like to be part of independent Nigeria. So the part Atiku comes from in Adamawa State, then Gongola State at some point, they voted to be part of Nigeria. So they became Nigeria. Why southern Cameroon, where you have Bakassi at the moment, voted to join the other Cameroon that was governed by France? You know at the point NCNC was the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons. At that point, NCNC the name was changed. So that was why the plebiscite was called. Some would call it referendum. So the plebiscite held on February 11th and 12th, 1961, with Southern Cameroon opting to join the Republic of Cameroon and Northern Cameroon voting to be part of Nigeria. These talks laid the framework for the fiscal federalism that heralded the policies and objectives of the regions in the First Republic. The regions had financial autonomy and they regulated their security. There was a federal police acting as a balance. You get the point? The regions were somewhat independent. That was what Ojukwu wanted in Aburi. But how did the regions lose that sort of independence? When we come to Agui-Ironsi, we will discuss that. The regions had financial autonomy and regulated their security, with the federal police acting as a balance. The development of infrastructure witnessed under this arrangement is unrivaled in the annals of Nigeria's checkered history. It was the best of times. The competition was healthy. As the Western region built Obafemi Awolowo University, then University of Ife, the Eastern region said, no way. Eastern region came up with University of Nigeria, Nsukka. The Northern region said, we will not be left out. And Ahmadu Bello University was born. As Obafemi Awolowo came with Western Nigerian television, the Eastern region said, no way. They came out with their own. You could see that competition. Awolowo was using cocoa. There was palm oil in the Eastern region. Now, when you hear people talk about restructuring, they are saying, let's go back to where we are coming from. Akinri-Ade was a member of the armed forces. He fought in the Civil War. At some point, he was Nigeria's chief of army staff. So, when we talk of restructuring, is the North ready for restructuring? Let's listen to Akinri-Ade.
This morning, somebody posted the report of a meeting. Lee Kuan Yew was here. 65 days after he left, Gowon became head of state. And Gowon, when he was already 65 days in office, also called a meeting of the North, the West, the East, and the Midwest. They were all represented by very high caliber people. Babawolo was there, Nauru, Eyo, and the rest of them were there. If you see the report of that meeting, it is obvious that the North knew exactly what they wanted. And what has happened now is because we have put up this rent society, their successors now saw Nigeria as a milking cow. And that is why suddenly they developed this idea that they don't know what Nigeria should be like. They were all agreed that any of those regions can form its own itself into whatever they want. They can create states there, they can create whatever they want, but they have to do it. Second, they have to be able to account for themselves. That means they have to earn everything that they require, and they can develop anytime they like. And there was a major clause which says anyone who wants to opt out of that Nigeria is free to do so. The reports are there. And I just want us to know that it is this rent society, this oil and everything that came where people can eat without working is what informed this confusion that the Northerners are now putting to the table.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
That is Akinri-Ade there talking about restructuring. I can see us watching on X. X guys, can we retweet this broadcast so that we can attract more persons into the classroom? Yes, X guys, I can see you guys watching. Can we retweet? Or can we exit? So that more persons will join the classroom. Don't just listen alone. Let's bring in more persons into the classroom. The class of politics and power. So I'm calling on you to retweet this broadcast if you're on X. I can see you on Facebook. Can you share? can you share the broadcast so that we have more persons coming in? As you share, you are alerting somebody, and the person is coming to join the class. We have reached the point in our national life where the history of where we are coming from is told to the young and the old. And we will exchange ideas for development. The essence is to learn from history. You that is listening, you might be a president someday. What are the books you are reading to prepare yourself for the future? What are the programs you are listening to prepare yourself for the future? So State Affairs is one program I will encourage you to listen to. You also bring your ideas into the program. There are things to learn from you. As you listen, you distribute the message by sharing, by retweeting. You are on LinkedIn. We are broadcasting on LinkedIn at the moment. You can also listen to this program on State Affairs app. So you can download the app on Google Play Store and Apple Store. State Affairs with Edmund Obilo. If you search for it on Google Play Store and Apple Store, you can download the app. The app is a radio on its own. I'm happy you are in this class, and I'm happy you are sharing and retweeting. Also leave your comments. Do not forget that. Talking about pre-independence. The period 1959 witnessed the peak of agitation for independence in Nigeria. It was an era of robust national debates and expectations. During the time, the Willis Commission of Inquiry, set up in 1957 by the Secretary of State for Colonies, Alan Lennox Boyd, just submitted its report. You recall that until 1963, when the Midwest region was created, Nigeria had 3 regions: Western, Eastern, and Northern. Remember the question I'm trying to answer. How did we get to Aburi? So I'm trying to trace the conflicts of Nigerian federalism to create a background to Aburi, how we got to Aburi. During the Willis Commission, some decisions were reached. It was a commission headed by Sir Henry Willis. That commission looked into the complaints of marginalization by minority ethnic groups and the agitations for new states. Now, under the regional system, the Kensarowiwas, the Ijos, the Shekiris were complaining of the dominance of the major ethnic groups like the Igbo. The Western region controlled where you know as Bendel today, Edo and Delta. Port Harcourt, Calabar, Akwa Ibom were under the Eastern region. And the Igbo tribe was the dominant ethnic group. So those minority tribes were not comfortable with the majority Igbo. They were complaining of dominance, that the Igbos were dominating them. You could see why they did not back the Igbos during the war. They wanted to break away from that dominance. They wanted their own state. And that was why the Willis Commission of Inquiry was set up to look into the agitations of minorities. In the northern region, those in the Benue axis today, Plateau State, were not comfortable with the dominance of the Fulani. So they also wanted their own state. The Ts, the Jukuns, They were not comfortable with the dominance of the Hausa Fulani, so they wanted their own states too. They were agitating. That is why if you read about J.S. Tucker, the leader of the Middle Belt at that time, United Middle Belt Forum, there was the Tiv massacre. It was a fight for their own state. So the Willis Commission was set up to look into the complaints of marginalization by minority ethnic groups and the agitations for new states. The Commission recommended that a Bill of Rights to protect the fundamental human rights of the minorities be entrenched in the Constitution. But it stopped short of recommending the adjustment of the boundary between the northern and western regions. Why did he not recommend it? Why? Why did Britain refuse to break the borders? Why? Now let's read from a book. I want us to read from this book. It's a class of politics and power. Yes, this book, The House of Oduduwa Must Not Fall. You see the book? The House of Oduduwa Must Not Fall. Interesting book, classic. You should have this book in your library. If you're interested in this book, go to darabooks.com. You get a copy. I want to read from this book. It's a book written by Olaniwu Ajayi. Let's read from page 106. 106 to 107. Yes, 106. The boundaries were not adjusted when the Willis Commission submitted its report. Why? So let's read from page 105 of this book. It says, in the case of Nigeria, the existing regions were retained in spite of the annoying and unacceptable disparity in size, partly because the colonial officials working in the north, who foresaw the political advantage that would accrue to the northern region, were a very effective lobby in Whitehall, and partly, no doubt, because the British government felt that a Nigerian government controlled by conservative northern politicians would be more stable and favorable to its interest. I'm reading from the book, This House of Oduduwa Must Not Fall, written by Sir Olaniwu Ajayi of blessed memory. Olaniwu Ajayi says, little wonder therefore that northern Nigeria found itself from the very beginning of Nigerian self-government in the front burner of Nigeria's political power and control. It is therefore not surprising that the caliphate seeks by all artifice and ingenious devices every means to hold fast to power in Nigeria. The author says, as it may be observed, the North took no part in the government of Nigeria until 1945, after the Legislative Council had been promoted. When they had joined the South, they took part in the Constitutional Review 1949 to 1950, where the northern leaders present emphatically asserted the intention of the North and made 3 demands, which they asserted must be granted, otherwise they would secede from Nigeria. You know, it was the North that began to threaten that they wanted to leave Nigeria, not the South or the Eastern region. It was the North from day one. The North had continued to threaten, if you don't give us what we want, we will break away. And Britain kept giving them what they wanted. Olaniwu Ajayi says, first, the North demanded that there should be no alteration in the north-south boundary in favor of the south. You know, Awolowo was saying the north was too big. The north was too big. Why not break it up? And the north said, if you break it up, we will leave Nigeria. First, they demanded that there should be no alteration in the north-south boundary in favor of the south. Second demand was that the number of representatives to the House of the British officials had accorded to them more than 50% of the population of Nigeria. Are you getting this point? Are you with me? I'm reading from this book, Sir Olaniwun Ajayi's book. This house of Oduduwa must not fall. Listen to this point again. Second demand was that the number of representatives to the House of Representatives should be on the basis of population, knowing that although there had been no census, the British officials had accorded to the North more than 50% of the population of Nigeria without census. The third demand was that revenue sharing should be on population basis, and that of the North should be 50%. After a long debate, it was agreed that demands 1 and 3 should be left to the governor to handle. When the North remained adamant, it was agreed that their second demand should be granted. Olaniwun Ajayi said, since then, the North has maintained its dominance over the whole country, in spite of the fact that there has been no generally acceptable census figure in the whole country. As a result, the North has the highest number of states in Nigeria. It has the highest number of local governments, and by implication, the highest allocation in the national revenue sharing. All attempts by the government to have genuine, authentic, and acceptable national identification cards have been thwarted. The Hausa Fulani love power, and they do not joke with it. You see, if you read this book, Olaniwun Ajayi wrote 2 classical works. One is Nigeria, Africa's Failed Asset. That book is on udarabooks.com. The book is super. And this is a follow-up on that book. Did I say 2? He wrote 3 books. 3 quality works on Nigerian history before he died. We have 2 of them on udarabooks.com. And you can also get this book by contacting Udara Books on WhatsApp. Get our WhatsApp numbers. They are on this screen. I recommend this book to you. This house of Oduduwa must not fall. And I hope to send a copy of this book to President Bola Tinubu. That is if he doesn't have a copy yet. The president should have a copy of this book. He should have a copy of this book. And you should have a copy of this book. I've just read from Olaniwun Ajayi's book, This House of Oduduwa Must Not Fall. So go on udarabooks.com and get a copy. You can also get a copy by contacting us on WhatsApp. Udara Book and State Affairs are linked. They are together. Udara Books is State Affairs bookstore. State Affairs is Udara Books' program on history, politics, and power. So they are linked. I have read from On a Darkling Plain, an account of the Nigerian Civil War by Ken Saro-Wiwa. I have read from This House of Oduduwa Must Not Fall by Olaniwun Ajayi. You see the books we have on this table. It's a class of books. It's a class of books. A class of interviews. How did we get to Aburi? So I'm highlighting the issues that led to the discussion in Aburi. Now this question of border adjustment would later heat up the polity after independence, when the Northern People's Congress, MPC, MPC was in charge of the federal government. Then, because they wanted to punish Awolowo for daring them, decided to create from the Western region a Midwest region. Awolowo has been saying, no, the North is too big. That is why they are dominating parliament. That's why they are controlling national revenue. To punish Awolowo, they decided to break Awolowo's region with federal power. By this time, Awolowo had already been sent to prison. We'll get to that point. These are the issues that led to the Civil War. Because if you don't follow the history, you will just say, oh, the Igbos just wanted to fight. No. There were issues. It kept degenerating. We were not resolving the conflict. Awolowo had been sent to prison, and his region was broken. So they now created another region known as the Midwest region from the Western region. So Nigeria became a 4-region country. Preceding the submission of Willick's report was the 1958 Constitutional Conference. It was the last conference before Nigeria got her independence in 1960. Before the 1958 conference was the 1957 London Conference, where it was agreed that the Western and Eastern regions be granted self-government. I've made that point before. The conference also created the office of the Prime Minister of the Federation. But it was in the 1958 conference that the decision to grant Nigeria independence on the 1st of October was taken. It was not long after independence that the center began to crack. The action group witnessed internal crisis, and that crisis led to the imprisonment of Obafemi Awolowo. The direction Nigeria would go was seen in the Kanu riots of 1953. Eastern and Western region parliamentarians in the 1953 motion for independence debate wanted self-government for Nigeria in 1956. Nigeria was supposed to have gotten her independence before Ghana. Ghana got her independence in 1957. So the Eastern region and the Western region were ready for independence by 1956. And they brought that motion to the parliament in 1953. It was a motion that was moved by Anthony Enahoro of the Action Group. The North, led by Ahmadu Bello, in a counter motion, replaced 1956 with the phrase, as soon as practicable. With its majority in parliament, the North defeated the motion sponsored by Action Group. So as the northern delegates left parliament in Lagos, going back to the north, they were jeered and booed and insulted by onlookers. After this incident, a delegation of Action Group members led by Ladoke Akintola visited Kanu. This visit triggered the Kanu riots of 1953, when northerners, apparently enraged by the treatment of their leaders in Lagos, used the opportunity to unleash unspeakable violence on southerners living in Kanu. Lives were lost. By 1953, the seed of discord was already sown among the ethnic blocs. But the 1962 Action Group crisis was the starting point of a chain of events that culminated in the Civil War. I want us to listen to this interview with Femi Kende. Remember, if you scroll down my X page, you would find the interview with Femi Kende. Not this particular interview. I had this interview with him 5 years ago. The video interview on my social media pages is a recent one. So let's listen to Femi Kende explaining the crisis in the Western region, and you make your deduction from the past for you to be able to prepare for the future.
The divide was this. SLA wanted a federalist approach to governance that will bring the Hausas, the Igbos, and the Yorubas, together. The action group started as a regional party, Egbe Omo Odudura. Just like the MPC that started as an Arewa something, led by Dr. Diko. His approach was to bring all these tendencies together, luckily having been a member of the federal parliament. Chief Obafemi Awolowo, you may say he was not a regional demigod, but Awolowo's interest was to develop the Western region to an international standard.
But he also wanted to do that for Nigeria. The reason he went to the center.
And by 1959, Awolowo had a dream, which he called flashes of inspiration. And he said he saw himself becoming the Prime Minister of Nigeria. So on the 3rd of November 1959, he addressed the parliament at a valedictory section in Ibadan and left for Lagos to become a less powerful personality.
Was that his undoing?
That was the undoing.
Did he calculate well?
Well, altruistically, he calculated well that, all these things we have done in the Western region, perhaps we could replicate it in the entire broad spectrum of Nigeria. But politics was not like that, because the British government had skewed politics and leadership favorably towards the North by numerical strength.
Awolowo should have known.
They had more members in the parliament. And in 1959, Edmund, when the action group moved into the northern region to shop for more members to the parliament, the action group government spent £10 million sterling to campaign. This money was borrowed from the NIPC of the Western region. The NIPC was using the funds of the Western Region Marketing Board. And in that election, Awolowo brought spectacular innovations using helicopter
for
campaigns and all sort of things like that. What they would do, by the time the Awolowo helicopter would land on a particular field, they would have brought in cows to populate the field. And the action group campaigned vigorously in the northern region and the middle belt. But do you know that election was a fiasco? The action group didn't even make a seat. And that was why they call it Bakodaya. Bakodaya is 0. So you will see that if Awolowo had stayed in the Western region, if we had maintained this feat, by 1957, the Western region government of Awolowo had its own ambassador in Great Britain, which they call Agent General, and the first Agent General was Emir Okorodudu. If at the 15-acre Sinton Road, that was the residence of the Prime Minister of the Western region, has been taken over by the federal government. You understand? So, all these concepts, they travel, they see things. Awolowo went to Australia to bring this idea. Awolowo went to Israel to bring the idea of the farm settlements, which they call the kibbutz system, through his Minister for Agriculture, Chief Akideko. If we had maintained a Western region of the Awolowo dream, and Awolowo, as the vision driver, had remained in office because he still had one more year to go as premier of the Western region, the Western region would have been an Eldorado.
Perhaps Awolowo calculated that since party is supreme, whoever becomes premier in his absence will always bend to the wishes of the party, which Akintola refused to do. Awolowo was the leader of the party.
Politics, Edmond, is dynamics, and there are intrigues. I told you that there are personalities that will be working for Awolowo and will be working for Akintola.
Was Akintola consumed by the lust for power?
Akintola was not even interested in the premiership of the Western region.
Yes, but by the time it fell on him, remember, before he even got there as the deputy, Bode Thomas had died.
Yes, he became the deputy leader by election. He defeated Atoppressed,
the
Shekiri man, at a strongly contested election. You see, but the contention of the leaders of the party was that since Bode Thomas was of the core Yoruba, it behoves that another core Yoruba should succeed Bode Thomas.
Awolowo didn't want him as deputy.
Awolowo had no choice because the Lagos tendencies wanted SLA Akintola as the deputy leader of the party.
Was that when the problem started quietly?
Well, it could have started quietly, but not evidently. But you see, politics had to change tune. When in 1961, the Odema official had to go the way of the Awolowo. Akintola reduced his salary to 1 penny.
Why did he do that?
Well, dynamism of politics.
He wanted to show I'm the premier.
Yes, I'm the premier.
At that point, he was ready to displace Awolowo.
No, is it dynamism of politics? Why was Alaafin Adeniran deposed?
Let's look at that story.
Why was he deposed? Is it not the same dynamism?
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Yes, that was a discussion with Femi Kehinde, the author of the book Samuel Ladoke Akintola in the Eyes of History. So he has led us into the crisis in the Western region that later snowballed into Operation Wettier and then led to the first military coup in Nigeria. To satisfy his ambition of national leadership, as explained in that interview, Obafemi Awolowo stepped down from the premiership of the Western region in 1959 and then moved to the Federal House of Representatives, where he hoped he would become the Prime Minister. But he became leader of opposition because the MPC went into alliance with Nnamdi Azikiwe NCNC, leaving Awolowo with no option but to become the leader of opposition. The Awolowo faction at the February 1962 party's annual Congress in Jos decided to sack Akintola as the deputy leader for insubordination. At this time, Akintola was now going into alliance with Ahmadu Bello, Tafawa Balewa, against Awolowo. So the action group suspended him in 1962. Akintola's supporters in the party, like Ayo Rosiji, was also removed as the party's secretary. The governor of the Western region, who was also the Ooni of Ife, Oba Adesoji Aderemi, in accordance with constitutional provision, removed Akintola as premier and appointed P.S. Adegbenro in his place. This decision must first be ratified by the Western Region House of Assembly for it to take effect. But matters got to a head on the day of ratification. That day, there was free-for-all fight in Parliament. Lawmakers threw chairs and punches. As a result, the Tafawa Balewa-led federal government declared a state of emergency in the western region and appointed Dr. M.A. Maje Kudumi, then Federal Minister of Health, the administrator of the western region. You see how the North displaced Awolowo and took over the western region, and this time began to back Akintola. It is politics, right? Interesting. So as all this were happening, agitations were going on. The young military officers were watching, saying, what is happening? Why is it happening? On the 2nd of November 1962, Chief Obafemi Awolowo and 30 of his political associates were accused of plotting a coup to overthrow the federal government led by Prime Minister Balewa. They were charged to court for treasonable felony, conspiracy to commit a felony, and conspiracy to effect an unlawful purpose. Awolowo was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Akintola, who was now in alliance with the Northern People's Party, after forming a new party, the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NNDP, bounced back as the premier of the western region after the end of emergency. The 1964 federal election crisis that resulted from the flawed process that gave victory to the MPC-NNDP alliance, called the Nigerian National Alliance, was another boiling point in the crisis that rattled Nigeria. The action group went into alliance with Azikiwe-led National Council of Nigerian Citizens, NCNC, and other smaller parties to form the United All Progressive Grand Alliance, UPGA. Now listen to this point. Some have asked, why did the coupists not kill any Igbo man? So some have said it was an Igbo coup. Some said it's not an Igbo coup. Remember, at this time, Awolowo was in prison. Awolowo's party had went into alliance with Azikiwe's party. At this point, Yoruba and Igbo came together to take on the north. But Awolowo was in prison, and Azikiwe was the president. The action group joined party with NCNC, and they then formed an alliance known as the United All Progressives Grand Alliance, UPGA, not ABGA. You have ABGA today, UPGA. So by the 21st of December 1964, more than 70 candidates of NNA, that is the Northern People's Alliance and Akintola Alliance, had returned unopposed. This meant that the alliance was set to sweep the parliamentary election. How? They were using federal power to rig the election. They rigged that UPGA. In fact, there was no election. UPGA screamed blue murder, alleging that the election has been seriously rigged by NNA, using the instrumentality of the federal government. The electoral umpire, the Federal Electoral Commission, FEDECO, chaired by Eyo Iswa, at the outset agreed that the processes leading to the 1964 election had its flaws and promised to rectify the issues, but nothing was done before voters went to the poll. The bottom line is that UPGA, noticing the irregularities in the nomination of candidates, intimidation and thuggery, boycotted the election, giving the NNA the opportunity to take majority seats in the parliamentary election. Why voting did not take place in the eastern region? It took place in the western and northern region. In this case, one can understand why President Nnamdi Azikiwe after the announcement of the 1964 election result, refused to call for the inauguration of parliament. You had prime minister, who was the head of government, and president, who was the head of state. But the prime minister was more powerful. He ran government. He appointed the ministers. Azikiwe was more ceremonial. But it was the duty of the president after every election to say, I want to inaugurate parliament. So because the 1964 election was a seriously flawed one, Azikiwe swore not to call for the inauguration of parliament. This almost brought the country to its knees until prominent Nigerians intervened to save the situation. A compromise was reached to form a broad-based government that excluded Awolowo's party, the Action Group. And the young military officers were watching, saying, these politicians are taking the country for granted. They were watching. This was 1964. This is part one of the Aburi Accord. I'll be rounding off soon. The part one is to lay the background before the guns began to boom. What happened? So the next edition will now look at Aburi in total. What was in that document? What was signed? Why was it not implemented? Why did we allow the war to happen? Why were Easterners massacred in the North? From the discourse so far, it is clear that Nigeria's foundation was laid on ethnic suspicion, and it pits the North against the South, even to this moment. It was pursued in the interest of the colonialists. But what about us? Why can't we redefine it? After October 1st, 1960, Nigeria was expected to rally its people, draft policies geared towards development, but it began to fall into the traditional frontiers that divides it. The frontiers are ethnic, religious rivalries, nepotism, corruption, injustice, and human rights violations. These are sub-themes of the national question. By this, a state divided against itself was born, culminating in the Nigerian Civil War that was fought from 1967 to 1970. There are some interesting articles I want you to read. If you can find them, just Google them. You can Google some of the works of Ali Mazrui and Kirk Green. They did a work together. In that work, Ali Mazrui and Kirk Green, when I'm talking about, okay, Ali Mazrui wrote his and Kirk Green wrote his. This was not a combined work. But they made similar arguments. That's the point I want to make. Similar argument. And the argument is that by preserving Northern Nigeria's majority, size, and by giving them the advantage of population, Britain contributed to the forces that culminated in the Nigerian Civil War. This deepening regionalism and the contradictions in the regional system constituted the most damaging legacy of colonial rule. Sherwood Smith, in his 1969 writing, insists that the British had no choice but to maintain the North's decisive numerical advantage, as it was the sole defense against political and economic domination by the South. The South was more educated. They were more aggressive. Awolowo was very smart. So if you now gave the South power again, the North will be taken out. That was the argument. You know, by 1900, you had Yoruba lawyers. Igbo men were already having PhDs by 1920-25, but not the North. So you could see that those who even fought for Nigeria's independence were mostly from Igbo land and Yoruba land, not the North. So Sherwood makes that point in that article. Now, I want you to listen to this analysis made by Odia Ofemu, the author of the book Taking Nigeria Seriously. Odia Ofemu, in a conference in Ibadan, explained the political intrigues of the early 1960s in Nigeria. Let's go back to that time as we round off.
Before 1960, Nigeria was quite a conglomerate. We knew which area was where. We had homelands, and people defended their homelands in various ways. We wondered how the homelands could become cross-cutting environments for the defense of our freedom. But that period passed, and the competition between the homelands became the core value and core reality of our politics. It is always good never to forget that it is the centrality of that competition to the Nigerian force field that has ensured nothing else will work here. Because the nature of the morganatic marriage, the kind of lopsided marriage that was built for Nigeria, ensured that we would never have a level playing field unless we created it. If there was a geographical expression, we needed to set out what would turn that geographical expression into a cultural expression. Awolowo did attempt it to spell out what needed to be done for the geography to become a cultural expression. But because he was usually beaten out of it, either by his opponents or by internal fractions within his own party, what needed to be done always overreached the rest of us. We never managed to hold on to it. I want us never to forget that at independence, it was a struggle between three regions, each dominated by a major ethnic group that organized a major political party. And each had an opposition that was based on a minority seeking freedom for themselves within the freedom that the rest of Nigeria was angling for. It is important that we never forget this. And the resolution that came was two of the three regions banding together to determine how the third would be excluded. People have forgotten what actually happened. And when you read the books, it is not played up enough. The point is, the NCNC Igbo fraction was told, if you form a coalition with the action group, you will be struggling with people who already have everything that you have. It will be a great struggle. So why not build up your coalition with the North so that you can take all the jobs that the North would not have the manpower to cover? And that was a perfect arrangement. If you follow Chinua Achebe's book, There Was a Country, he actually talks very glowingly about how the Igbo people became dominant. It became dominant because as a result of that agreement they reached, the Igbo people could take over all the jobs in the system. And they did. But by 1964, they discovered that the iron and steel industry, military installations, the railway extensions, the Kainji Dam, and then the steel industry, which had already been slated for Onitsha, now became something that would go again to the north. It was at that point that an election took place in 1964, and Nnamdi Azikiwe refused to call Balewa to form a government. And it was on the day that this was properly exposed that Ojukwu first went to Nnamdi Azikiwe in 1964 to say, let's plan a coup. Zik was too frightened of a coup, and he ran away. But Balewa had taken the line that will become the determinant of all other things. He simply sent the soldiers to seize the state house and put the president under custody. When Nigeria's story is being told, nobody tells the story so well as to let us know that that was the first military coup in Nigeria's history. When Nnamdi Azikiwe, after having published a speech in his own West African parliament saying, I won't invite you to form a government, decided to write another before evening, calling them to form a government. If you are thinking of how to deal with the Buhari situation, just remember, the unitarism that came after the coup was from an NCNC script. The unitarism that displaced the NCNC script was an Arewa script. What the Arewa people have tried to do ever since is not only to take over the country, but to change the society in such a manner that becomes malleable in their interest.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
Interesting analysis by Odiao Femu, a political scientist, a great poet. Yes, I enjoyed that analysis. Did you enjoy it? Are you enjoying this class of politics and power? Let's get your feedback. Tell us what you feel about the class. Make your suggestions. Now, let me go further to break down some of the points that Odiao Femu made in that speech. What Odiao Femu referred to as the first coup in Nigeria was the failure of Nnamdi Azikiwe to rally the military to his side during the 1964 election crisis. In the battle of supremacy with the Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, Zik had thought that as the president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, that the military would take orders from him. But this was not to be, as the then colonial head of the army, Major General Welby Everard, was legally advised to take the side of Tafawa Balewa, forcing Zik to renege on his well-published stance that he will not call on Balewa to form a new government after the severely flawed 1964 election. In that speech by Odiao Femu, you heard that Balewa ordered the army to arrest Zik. It was a house arrest. He couldn't come out, and he was forced to write another letter to say, okay, I will now call a government. I want to read from a book. That's the last book we'll be reading for this edition of the program. I want to read from this book, Emeka. Emeka is Ojukwu's first name. Emeka. I want to read from this book. Emeka Ojukwu. This book is written by Frederick Forsyth. It is one of the best biographies on Odumegwu Ojukwu. So let's read from page 40 to 42. It's about the same story. Frederick Forsyth says Nigeria's president was by then an Easterner of NCNC party. Although a non-executive president, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was also holder of the title of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. But the democratically elected government was of the MPC, headed by Alhaji Tafawa Balewa, under whom The defense minister was Alhaji Ribadu. In the event of a political crisis and in the event of conflicting orders from the president and the prime minister, whom should the army obey? Forsyth asked in the book. No one knew, he says. No one had the faintest idea, he continues. No one had ever thought of it before. They agreed that Emeka Ojukwu should find out exactly where they all stood, and as quickly as possible. Ojukwu resolved to consult the British general officer commanding, General Welby Everard. At this time, Ironsi was not the leader of Nigeria's army. It was when Everard led that he handed over to Ironsi. Frederick Forsyth in this book said, but before Ojukwu could do so, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, who had attended the meeting and said nothing, eager as ever to seek favor with the British, something that still continues today, had run to General Welby Everard with a story that Emeka Ojukwu was holding political meetings. Can you see this? Gowon was in that meeting when Ojukwu was sent to go and ask Everard, who would the army obey? But before Ojukwu could get to go where Everard, Gowon had run to go and say, see, Ojukwu had called a political meeting, he's planning something. Tawa, you would say, human being and conflict. Okay, let's continue reading. So the general summoned Ojukwu and asked him what he was up to. Emeka replied that he would be delighted to explain, but that he wanted the same group of officers he had already spoken to be present at the meeting. The general agreed, and the officers were summoned. Emeka Ojukwu went through it all again. When he had finished, General Welby Everard was lost in thought. You are right, he said to Ojukwu. I don't know the answer. It never occurred to me. But why didn't you come to me first? Ojukwu replied, because this is a Nigerian affair, and you are a British officer first. If the worst comes to the worst, the British High Commission may order you to stand aside. That would leave us not knowing which way to go. We have to know. Welby Everard admitted that if ordered to stand aside, he would obey his British orders and do so. He promised the officers he would consult the country's senior legal officer, the Attorney General, for a ruling. Then he rounded on Gowon and ticked him off for spreading alarmist rumors. As they left the meeting, Ojukwu asked Gowon why he had considered it fit to go running to the general with his tales. Gowon mumbled that he was sorry, but he did not understood what Emeka was talking about. Jack, Ojukwu used to call Gowon Jack. Even in Aburi, he called him Jack. So Ojukwu said, Jack, the next time I say something that you don't understand, would you mind coming to me to ask first? So the general consulted the Attorney General and got the ruling. It was clear, in the event of conflict, the officer corps should obey the democratically elected political leader of the country, the Prime Minister, or his subordinate, the Defense Minister. Remember, I'm reading from the book Emeka, written by Frederick Forsyth. It's the biography of Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. Frederick Forsyth is a British journalist. Yes, as I conclude, it was clear, in the event of conflict, the officer corps should obey the democratically elected political leader of the country, the Prime Minister, or his subordinate, the Defense Minister. The worst did not come to pass that winter of 1964, but it did 14 months later, in January 1966, with the president out of the country, the Prime Minister dead, but his body not discovered, and the Defense Minister unable to be found. General Nronsi, in those confused days, followed the ruling of 1964 by consulting the most senior ranking minister, Alhaji Deep Charima. So let's leave that story at that point. You can get this book on udarabooks.com. Look at it. Emeka, classic. Get some books and read. Do we still have libraries? These books should be in our libraries so that we can read and understand where we are coming from. So having read the story from Emeka, you find this book on udarabooks.com. udarabooks.com. And you can also get them or get the book through our WhatsApp numbers. The numbers are on the screen. So contact us on WhatsApp and get your copy. I have laid the groundwork for the discussion of Aburi in the next edition of the program. This is part 1. Let Professor Egosa Osagai speak to the point made by Odi Alfemu. Both of them were in that conference. So after Odi Alfemu spoke, Egosa Osagai came to play the devil's advocate. You know, what is called counterfactual in scholarly discourse. So let's listen to Professor Egosa Osagai. Remember him? He is presently the Director General of the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs.
There is something I see here from our old teacher also, Professor Billy Dudley. Billy Dudley was, in his 1972 book, making a strong case in the introductory pages, talking about what might have been counterfactual. His simple question was, it is true Nigeria has had all of these problems, but is it possible that a country like Nigeria would have been created without the British intervention? I mean, think of that for a minute. Because many times we say Nigeria is a colonial mistake. They talk about the mistake of 1914. Now, Dudley was simply saying that he thinks that we had sociological and economic linkages amongst all of these groups in Nigeria that would possibly suggest, counterfactually, that if the British didn't come, something close to Nigeria may still have been created. We cannot argue for or against a counterfactual, but it's quite plausible. It's quite plausible because, you know, if you go inside the walled city of Kano, you will find Yarubawa quarters. And that's not a colonial creation. It's been there. I mean, the Nupes that found their way to Lagos, today we are celebrating Lagos at 50, those Nupes who came can claim the indigeneity that every person else is claiming in Lagos. It's the same thing in Port Harcourt. The Jaws are everywhere. Wherever you find water, you will find the Jaws. And they say they are the only group in Nigeria without any myth of having come from somewhere else. They probably came with water. So, I mean, that's the Nigerian narrative. That's the counterfactual. That's one. The second thing is, when we heard here that in 1959, when you needed a coalition, perhaps the NCNC was told that this is the better way to tread. Now, Dudley has a different perspective. He talks about William Riker's theory of the minimum winning coalition, which is rational behavior. But he says, if you were simply being rational and you wanted to maximize the spoils of office, then the NPC was the most unfavored coalition partner. But in the event, it was the AG and the NCNC that had the coalition. And the justification for that coalition was provided. Well, the justification was provided by no less a person than Nnamdi Azikiwe himself. He had what Dudley refers to as the aspectival preferences and the synoptic preferences. Aspectival saying, look, we have looked at the chemistry and the arithmetic, and we have seen if we go into coalition with the action group, perhaps the guys in the Western region are higher than us in many respects, so we cannot maximize the spoils. So why not go with a partner that has the numbers, but not the qualitative, competitive status? That was aspectival. But the synoptic was no less important. He said, if we have an AG-NC-NC coalition, we would exclude the North. And for a very young country, that's not something that is likely to take us far. Now, we can go back and say, maybe they didn't know what they were doing. But those were weighty considerations at the time, but especially the synoptic preferences.
State Affairs with Edmondo Bilo is live.
It was our saga there. Interesting. Ewusao Saga is a professor of political science. He's a former vice chancellor of Igbinedion University, Okada. I recommend one of his books to you, entitled Nigeria Since Independence, Crippled Giant. Crippled Giant is one of the best books to read on Nigerian history. You see this? Crippled Giant. Get a copy of this book. You would love it. It's on udarabooks.com, a book written by Ewusao Sagai, the Director General of the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. Quality work. Lovely books. I love reading. I love research. So I read, and I read. As I read, I write. Are you ready to read my book? Yes, you should be ready to read my book. My book will be on your table soon. Read history. So I bring this book to you, Crippled Giant, Nigeria Since Independence, written by Ewusao Sagai. Get it on udarabooks.com. There's a book I've been looking for, but I'm so happy. Recently, we found it. I call this the best diary on the Nigerian Civil War. Look at this big book. It is the best diary. I call it a diary. You know, it's not somebody telling the story. No, it's a different book on the Nigerian Civil War. It's not somebody telling his own story. You know, documentations of the different reports by New York Times. Who said what? This book, if you are a researcher on Biafra and the Nigerian War, you should have this book by Dr. Luke Nnaemeka Anile. We are happy we found it. We've been searching for it. You know what we are doing in Udara Book? We are searching for every book on Nigerian history, and we are bringing them to you. Though most of these books are out of print, but even if they are old, we will find them. Even if it's 2 copies. But luckily, we got more than 50 copies of this. I'm so happy that this book is finally on Udara Bookstore. I'm going to review this book someday. I'm just bringing it to you. Remember, we are discussing Aburi Accord. But if you go on my pages, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, you will see the discourse on Nigerian history. So you can get this book. It's entitled The Untold Story of the Nigerian Biafran War. A chronological reconstruction of the events and circumstances of the war. Day by day analysis. Anti-erosion demonstration spread in the north. May 28, 1966. You turn to this page. May 28, 1966. Temporary calm in the north. Press censored. You now go again. Daily Times appears with blank front page. On May 29, 1966, text of a government broadcast. It's such a quality work. It makes me happy. I love this book. I love this book. I found it at last. I bought a copy 10 years ago. This copy, I bought it 10 years ago. But since the other book came on, we'll be looking for the book. Luckily, I found it. And we have mopped it. Get your copy on udarabooks.com. Yes, as we go, I can see I'm on YouTube now. Mao Pego Guni, thank you for joining the broadcast on YouTube. I'm happy. Ivan Green, he said, thank you, Mr. Edmond. God will surely continue to bless you and continue to enrich your knowledge and wisdom. This is truly educational and knowledgeable piece of work. Thank you, Ivan Green. Thank you. I'm happy you enjoyed the broadcast. Ifeanyi Eziala is on YouTube. He says, you are doing the hardest, most difficult, inevitable program in the Nigerian state. Hey, you they blow my head. Thank you. I appreciate it. Joseph Igodalo. Just like what Fulanese are still doing now, they see that the desolation of Nigeria is inevitable. The reason they are transporting their population with arms to the rest of the country. That's your analysis. Oyelami Babajide says, thank you, Radio Man, for enlightening us on history. Keep up the wonderful job. Thank you. GIS for Africa says, top content from an outstanding class. Thank you. Thank you for appreciating the class. Thank you. Yomi Olorunfemi says, good job, Radio Man. Joining you from Edmonton. Yomi, how is Edmonton, Canada? Happy that you listen. Thank you. DG Ajibola says, thank you very much. Insightful. This is part 1. Join me for part 2 on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Part 2, we will now look at the Aburi Accord document in details. Okay? So part 2 on Wednesday on this same platform, YouTube, X, Facebook, LinkedIn. So you join us at 2. And we'll encourage you to buy some books from us. Buying those books encourages us to go into more research and production. Our production cost is rising. So one of the ways to support us is to buy books from us. And it will also support your knowledge of history, of politics and power. Okay? Thank you. Thank you for always being there. Dikbo Adewumi is on YouTube. Thank you for being there. Who is on X? Let me see. Sending message from X. X guys are not sending messages, but they are there watching. We have the largest viewers on X. Yes, that is where you have the largest viewers on X. Thank you, X guys. Thank you. You can repost this tweet after this broadcast and take the message further. Let's go on Facebook. Facebook, thank you for always being there. Okay. Thank you. I can see your messages. Emmanuel Simon. Ben Chidi said he enjoyed the class. Thank you, Chidi. Thank you for always being there. Julius Amule Joye. Good afternoon to you. Nonso, thank you for joining the broadcast. Akonya Umoba. So Wednesday by 2 o'clock West African time for Part 2, Aburi Accord. I am Edmondo Bilo. Thank you for watching.